Welcome to the Voice of Texas Hunting. I'm your host, Jerison, and today we've got a heck of a show for you. Stay tuned. Today, I've got my good friend Jerry Johnston with me, and he's invited me into his beautiful home in Castroville, Texas. We're here in his man cave, and you should see this place. It's absolutely beautiful. Today, we're going to be talking about a few neat things that you're going to want to listen to. He's going to give us some background scoop and some behind-the-scenes things of the Texas trophy hunters. Jerry, how long have you been here in Castroville?
I bought this place in about 1992.
Okay. Where are you originally from?
Well, I was born, it's a long story, but I was born in Corpus Christi, Nueces County. But my dad was from Scurry County up in the neighborhood of Big Spring, Texas. And real soon after I was born, my dad already had her in the mood that we need to go bring this boy up in my hometown, Big Spring, Texas. But we were actually in a little bitty town called Dunn, which is just north of Big Spring. But I lived in Big Springs till about the second or third grade. Then we moved down here, and oddly enough, just right here out of Castroville, my dad bought a dairy farm. Had Holstein cows. And from there, I moved to Corpus Christi and went through the last part of grade school, all of junior high, and 2 years of high school.
Wow. So you're from all over South Texas.
I graduated in the 11th grade with no diploma.
Hey. Well, it worked. It worked for you, I guarantee you. You've got an awesome place. You've got ranches.
Right.
And you've got this little thing on your resume called the Texas Trophy Hunters.
That's it. I spent about, everybody has a dream, and I had a lot of dreams, to tell you the truth. Do this, do that. But this concept came into my mind as a result of my appreciation for what Ray Scott did with bass.
Really?
And I just thought, well, we're going to have a Texas Bass Association, except it's going to be deer, whitetail deer.
That's what I'm saying.
So that's how I got here, and
that was when? 1975?
That was 1975. I put a deadline. I was 30 years old that year. 1975, I turned 30 years old. And I had already, a year before, psychoanalyzed my own self, and I knew that I had to be moving. And it was time to make up my mind what the hell I wanted to do the rest of my life.
Right.
So
what you want to do when you grew up?
That's when I grew up. This is what I wanted to do. And through the years, there've been some real potholes in the middle of the road, and slack times in terms of how much money you had in the bank and all that kind of thing, like I guess anybody does trying to grow a business. But
sure.
We got her going, and it must have been a good idea because it's still here today.
That's right. I think it's a great idea. And I know I've told you this a lot over the phone and when we've been hanging out. You had a dream when you were young to start this.
Right.
I've had a dream since I was a little boy to work for the Texas Trophy Hunters.
Right.
And I've got to say, and I want everybody out there to know this, that it's such an honor to be able to do this podcast and working for the Texas Trophy Hunters and to be sitting here with the man, the myth, the legend in his home. I mean, I'm blown away. I'm humbled. I don't even know the words to say.
Well, I'm the same way. I'm just tickled to be on this part of the legend that you're creating.
Well, I hope that's what it is.
Yep.
I really do.
It will be.
We both love deer hunting.
Right.
And that's what this is all about.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the name of the podcast, right? The voice of the Texas deer hunter.
The voice of that's it.
And if there is a voice, if there is one voice to pick out that stands out in your head as Texas deer hunting, it's that man right there. If you hear that voice and don't think Texas deer hunting, well, then you may not be able to hear right. That's the way I see it.
Well, I consider that as having a voice as famous as Elvis Presley.
Pretty close. Pretty close. So, with this Texas Trophy Hunters thing that you've got on your resume, you started it. Obviously, it couldn't have been easy to start because there was nothing like it. I mean, it was you had nothing to go off of, and obviously there's no internet. I mean, you couldn't just say, "How do I do this?" and build this thing.
Right.
How in the world did you figure all that stuff out?
It's not a long story, but before what I was doing for an income, just prior to lighting the fuse in 1975, I was working for a club association called American Sportsman's Club, and their headquarters was in Denver, but they had what they call chapters in several states, and Texas was one of them. And I saw a little bitty ad in the newspaper, make a living out of hunting and fishing. And I thought, well,
sign me up.
Sign me up, man. This got to be BS. I mean, but I went for it, and real quickly learned that I had some sort of a natural ability to sign people up in that club. And I got paid a percentage of everybody I could sign up. It wasn't one of those deals where you've got a base pay. If you didn't make no sales and there wasn't no deposit in the American Sportsman's Club bank account, you didn't get a check. So and the check had to clear. So that's what I did for a long time before I got into exactly this, because that employer, as time went on, and it's going to sound very probably a little bit trying to be too smart, but I signed up so many members, or was responsible for them in the state of Texas, we started running out of property. And then people started having a problem making a reservation so they could go to one of these things that they were, ranches that they were wanting to go to, and they were having to wait and wait and wait. So it started to disintegrate because the property that they had leased was not enough for the number of members that they had.
Wow.
And so that was about the time I started looking for something else to do, but try to use everything I learned working for them. And that's kind of probably the best explanation. It was just something I wanted to do. I made up my mind I ain't gonna quit no matter how bad it gets, and that's exactly what happened for about 4 or 5 years. I mean, we barely could make ends meet, and we finally got her cooking through the years. And after about 5 or 6 years, I started to see the income trend was changing in my favor. For a change, I mean, I've had my CPA tell me, you can pay your help, but there ain't enough left to pay you.
Well, and that's part of owning a business.
Well,
I mean, that's
part of it. And
a lot of people have that struggle.
That's why you have to listen to Hank Williams Jr., but a country boy can survive.
That's right. Darn right. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so you put this association together, and you developed a magazine. Did that come right away?
Yeah, it was right off the get-go.
So was the magazine and the journal, was that the like your first goal, or was it the trade shows?
Well, it was part of it. I mean, they don't have all of this stuff anymore at Trophy Hunters, but we had an actual certificate that you would hang on the wall, frame it, hang it on the wall, member of,
Yeah.
and all of that. You had a card. Back in the day when you had to have a card, you had to put a card in your wallet. So they got that, and they got a cap.
Card carrying member.
Card carrying member. And it became association because it was built as an association. Because at that time there were no clubs like Bassmasters.
Right.
So we came up with TTHA, and of course that meant Texas Trophy Hunters Association. And it was basically just a copy with a different motive of an association as bass was. The only difference between bass and us is that bass, you can fish for fish 12 months out of the year. But with hunting, you've got, people in the field about 2.5 months out of the year because of our hunting seasons.
Yeah.
But they just don't ever give up. I mean, in other words, our membership are the elite of the elite. They're the people that this is just not a fling.
Yeah, diehards.
I mean, the people are solid. All they live for is trying to take a big whitetail deer, and we try to we try to help them do that.
Yeah.
So that's what the magazine basically was, just sorts of a gathering of minds.
Right.
And you could, and we tried, how, when, and where. I mean, that's what people want to know. I mean, we want to kill a big deer. Well, first thing, a lot of it's research. First thing you got to do is find out where in Texas, where do you live? So what counties are your best choices? Those kinds of things are what we tried to put in the magazine. We tried to teach them where to find them, how to get them, and the whole rollout.
And products too.
Yeah, and products too.
I mean, it wasn't just advertising for advertising's sakes. It was actually truly showing folks products that worked in their benefit to help with their hunting ventures.
Exactly. And the logo, the skull and 12 point with 2 double drops, became a household image. I mean, you could hardly, at least here in San Antonio and a couple other towns I've lived in, you could go down any major freeway and you'd see Texas Trophy Hunters decals on the back of the truck.
Oh, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Oh,
They
yeah.
were everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's a fun. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool whitetail hunter, you're not going to find anything that you'd be more happy with if you want to join up with something that might help you
Right.
in your hunting and where to hunt and all that sort of thing.
I agree.
We try to deliver all that stuff to them, always have. And I've got to admit that part of that formula is why the association grew like it did. Is it touched that little spot.
When did the trade shows come along? The extravaganzas?
Well, there were 2 magazines that came out in 1975, only 2 magazines, and in those days it was called Texas Hunters Hotline, and there were only 4 a year. It was a quarterly. We finally got the membership going to justify to increase the number of issues a year to 6, which made it bi-monthly. And
Which that still stands today, if I'm not wrong.
but we came from a quarterly.
Right.
We started off as a quarterly, we came up as a bi-monthly, as it is now. There's 6 issues a year. But the name changed. A lot of people don't even know that, but the title of the magazine, as I said, originally was Texas Hunters Hotline.
Mm-hmm.
Then I got this big idea to just call it the Journal of the Texas Trophy Hunters. And when I did that, it got cooking pretty good. So I naturally tried to get greedy, I guess what you'd have to say. And I said, well, if we can do this in Texas, let's just make it the American Trophy Hunters Association. Well, that idea lasted about 12 months. People just started dropping off. So if you're going to change the name to something that don't have Texas in it, I'm out.
Well, us Texans are proud. We are proud folks. You go messing with Texas, I don't know.
Well, I think anybody born and bred in Texas, to me, it's almost like we got our own country.
I agree with that.
I don't know of another state I've ever been in like Texas.
No.
I'm proud, and I never have figured it out why the company hadn't come out with you see them on Facebook, things like that, but I'm not from Texas, but I got here just as fast as I could.
Yeah.
I think those will sell like crazy.
You darn right. Well, yeah, and another thing with Texas and hunting, to me, if you're a true deer hunter,
That's right.
I don't care where you live in the world.
That's it.
If you're a hunter, you want to hunt in Texas at least one time in your life. And I don't, like I said, I don't care where you hunt, what you do, or anything like that. You, in the back of your mind, you're saying, I've got to get to Texas and kill a white-tailed deer. It's just, you got to do it. Kind of like a lot of people say, you know, I've got to get to Alaska and catch a salmon.
That's right.
You know, because that's where it's at. And this is where Texas is.
That brings me back to mind, because back in the days when I was in my 30s and 40s, we had the hole in the hornbuck, which was the world record at the time, and it came from right up on the Canadian border. Then next thing you know, there was a deer killed in Canada called the Hanson buck, which was the new world record. So that made all the people, and it was a mistake on our part, but everybody in Texas wanted to really kill a big deer. They weren't ashamed to take a trip up to Canada to see if they could kill one of them.
No, absolutely.
Because they're bigger bodied and everything.
Sure,
I mean, it's
sure.
a totally different species. But I could remember those days. And I know, you know, I grew up in West Texas, and it's pretty cold up there. It's pretty far north Texas. But I'm going to tell you something. You don't know what cold is till you go to Canada. And that's why on the way home on the airplane, you say, in your mind at least, this is my last trip. I ain't never coming back up here. But I went 3 years. I went 3 years in a row saying that every year.
Did you get a big deer?
I never did get the big one. I did have an opportunity to, but this guy
here comes
that
the
I
hunting
had,
stories.
I was in his pickup, and he was one of them guys that had a whole case of Lucky Strikes up on the dashboard, and he was constantly smoking. And in Canada, all the hunting areas are square blocks of a section of land. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like actually being in the middle of a town. You're going down this street and the other street's right over here, but there's crossovers. Anyway, it was one of those deals. And after I used this guy for about a half a morning and saw how deer reacted to the pickup and all this kind of stuff, I just noticed that as long as that pickup was moving, because that's what they hunted up there, out of pickups.
You can shoot out of the pickup.
You can shoot out of the pickup.
Outstanding.
You could then.
Yeah.
And if it was illegal, just don't tell anybody.
Right.
But I started seeing how they would react, and as long as that truck kept moving, they might stand out in the middle of a open field that's as big as a football field and just let you drive by. Mm-hmm. But the minute you stopped, they hooked them.
That whitetail getting boogie.
Anyway, I finally figured out what to do, just in case we saw one. It would be the one, you know. And I told the guy, I said, here's what I want you to do. And it could happen at any minute. In Canada, it can be right in the middle of the day because it's cold up there. It's not like down here in Texas where, you know, the first 10 minutes of the day or 15 minutes is the best time because it's cooler.
Right.
And it gets hot, they all go lay down. Mm-hmm. Shade tree somewhere. Anyway, I told him, I said, now look, if we happen to come up, and I see a deer that I would really like to shoot, and he's standing out in one of the middle of the field, I said, do not step on the brake, do not turn the key off, don't do anything, just keep going real slow, don't ever stop, and then when I say now, just cut the key off and let the truck slow down on its own and stop. And by that time, I'll have my rifle out the window, I'll have my crosshairs on him, and I will shoot him before he can run off. So that actually happened. We turned a corner, there was a bruiser of a buck, and he wasn't 50 yards off the road, standing on the side of a slope of snow. And I said, cut the key off. What for? I said, let's go back to square one. There's a big deer out there. Cut the key off. And he started around and looked. Holy. And he slammed the brakes on, and we went off in the damn bar ditch. That was my only chance that I've ever had to kill the deer I went to Canada for. He was huge. He was a monster. So I guess somebody else got him a little smarter than we were.
Man. Well, but now you have that story to tell, right?
Yeah.
And you
I got all kinds. You ain't got enough time.
Well, I know. You and I have been friends for years now, and man, I've heard some stories.
Yeah.
And I wish we could get them all in on one podcast, but it would take
too.
about 37 podcasts to even touch them.
Right.
You do have some that I'm going to drag out of you here in just a bit. But I want to go back to the trophy hunters thing.
All right.
Now, a lot of people in the public eye think that Jerry Johnston isn't associated with Texas trophy hunters anymore. And that's false.
Well, absolutely. Where am I at right now?
Right. I mean, every time I've seen you, you have a trophy hunter's hat on. 9 times out of 10, you got a trophy hunter's T-shirt on. And well, we're always talking shop, we're always talking deer, we're always talking trophy hunters. But a lot of people think, I mean, you did sell part of the business.
Yeah.
And you did step back a little bit.
Right.
But I'm just assuming and guessing that was more of a, well, it's time for me to start slowing down in life. I'm not out of it, but I'm just going to slow down a little bit. And people don't, I think a lot of people are confused because, the idea that the place sold or that you sold part of it was big news.
Yeah.
And I don't think it clicked with a lot of people that this man is still here. He's still involved. He's still an owner.
Well, I still have the title to my namesake. I mean, you know.
Right.
I mean, I still care about my children.
Well, and you've told me 100 times, trophy hunters is your baby.
Yeah.
And by all means, it is. I get that.
Yeah.
And nobody can take that away from you.
Well, I don't know. It don't need to be taken away from me because it's a fact. But
Right.
You're hitting a nail on the head. It is associated with my name and all that sort of thing. Even though I'm not pulling every lever and moving every dial and all that, stuff it takes to
Right.
that you do when you own something.
But you're still there. I mean,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
still
No,
he's still involved, guys. He's still the man.
You can't drive me off. I mean, you could, but I'll figure out some way to get by whatever you put up.
All right. I hear you. So, the trade shows, have they always been called Hunters Extravaganza?
No, the year was 1975 when we got cooking, and we did not have an event during that year because we basically got launched in the middle of the summer. So there was only 2 issues left for 1975. But the next year came around, and at that time, I wasn't even thinking trade shows. I was just thinking association. I wasn't thinking about booths and all this other stuff that developed out of the result of the inception of the idea of having a whitetail club. But the people that came to the first deal, it was like, I think we had, I don't know, 400 or 500 members.
Wow.
In 1975, probably had 400 or 500 members. I mean, if you're being honest.
That's pretty significant.
Well, it is, but the first get together and see, I was looking at people like Safari Club. What do they do? What does Ray Scott do? What do they do? Well, they always had some sort of an annual fundraiser or a gathering, and they called them different things. And so I called the first one, which was down on the Riverwalk, downtown San Antonio. I called it First Annual Texas Trophy Hunters Convention. I called it a convention. And the local sports writers, who were Fred Malley, in those days we had 2 newspapers. We had the Light and the Express News. Fred Malley was the outdoor writer in those days. he was a key guy in naming that show, because we pulled one off in a little banquet hall, because we just didn't have that many exhibitors. And we kept calling it that name, and he says, and he was a cool old guy. I mean, really, you would be thinking 1920s when you saw him. The little hat he was wearing, the whole damn 9 yards, you know, his disposition and all that stuff. And he says, "Why are you calling this a convention?" And I said, "Well, isn't that what it is?" He said, "No." He said, "It's a hunter's extravaganza." He's the one that named it. Fred Malley. He'd been gone now 50 years. But he's the guy, and I listened to him. That's how the name popped up. It was Hunter's Extravaganza from there on in. Huh. At one time, well, for 2 years it was called a convention, but then it went to Hunter's Extravaganza.
Hunter's Extravaganza. And it started in San Antonio.
In San Antonio.
So Trophy Hunters has always been based in San Antonio, right?
It's our headquarters to this day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And every year, or well, minus last year because of COVID BS.
Yeah, right.
But every year there's been a convention in San Antonio.
Right.
But there's been also, extravaganza in San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth.
And the way that worked is the model of what we do at a show was developed right here in San Antonio. We got it down pretty good. We moved into the La Vita Assembly Hall first, which was a circular building, looked like a circular building about 1/10 the size of the Astrodome. So all of the booths were around the outer circles, and the tables and stuff were in the middle, so it was relatively small. And from there we moved across Main Street to the San Antonio Convention Center, which had acres of space. And I think the first one that we moved to was 50,000 square feet.
Wow.
And we were able to fill that up pretty good. And all that came from, I mean, I'm going backwards here, I'm recalling something that caused that to happen, is that these, you know, the local people that I'd been knocking on their door to put some ads in the magazine, they said, when they went to that first one, at the end of the day, they were coming up, people like Braden Wire and Metal and C.E. Blackwell, and a lot of the old timers had the beginnings of what we have today in terms of toys to hunt with, tripod stands, all that kind of stuff. They said, because I just let them put their stuff out, you know, just kind of fill up the room, you know.
Yeah.
And they came, several of them, they said, "Why don't you set this up with booths like the boat show? We'll pay you for a booth so we can, you know, cut the wolf loose. You know, we do some selling instead of just being around in hand and shaking hands and tipping glasses and all that stuff." So I thought about that for a minute. I started researching it, so I called a decorating company. I said, "How much does it cost if I had about 50 of them to set up a 10 by 10 booth with curtains halfway on the front and 8 foot on the back? What would it cost?" And it was sort of minimal. And so I put together a rate schedule. You know, if you wanted one booth, it was this. If you wanted 2 booths, it was that. And it was cheap to get it going. And that's actually the way that the consumer part of, which was originally only members only association, to make it comfortable for the hunting public to come in, because might get a membership.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
But that's kind of a short version of how it got to where it is.
And so many of those people that started exhibiting at your extravaganzas, it took their product or their ideas and grew those by leaps and bounds. I mean, it was a huge benefit to all these people that would come in and give you a few bucks to say, here, let me set up a 10 by 10
Right.
and show the public my
Well,
product.
see, then all of a sudden for those that were going to come in, the public that weren't members,
Yeah.
I didn't even know I didn't even know that people would pay money, but I found out they would.
Yeah.
So I'm not any marketing genius or anything. It was just a deal that we had something people liked.
Well, you may not think you're a marketing genius, but a lot of people would call you that. Because you did something that nobody's done. Well, they've done it now, but only because you started it.
Well, that is the truth, because once we got cooking, there were 2 doctors started showing up. I mean, and they introduced themselves. It wasn't that I just spotted them and knew they were a doctor from
Right.
Mississippi, but anyway, they were showing up at just about everything we did. And finally, one day, just out of curiosity, I mean, I already knew their names. I said, "Why are you guys driving all the way down to San Antonio, Texas, to go to a hunting show?" Because we want to have one in our state. Is that? I mean, we're not here to steal your secrets or none of that stuff. I said, "Hey, man, don't even say another word. If you can get more hunters involved, have at it." Exactly. Thus came the first competitor. It wasn't a competitor. Maybe too far away.
Yeah.
But there's only people about my age, which is 70 plus. Give myself a little benefit there. It gave other people a pattern to do the same thing that we were doing, which grew the whole sport, which grew a need for more of the products that are needed and are being invented as this evolution goes on. At one time, there was only one guy making a tripod stand. Now
Right.
there was 2. And then there's only one guy one time that had a box blind or any of the other stuff that you go by every year. Mm-hmm. But as this thing has grown, that industry has grown. They say that Texas trophy hunters had an effect on the value of recreational property, especially in South Texas.
I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So it influenced real estate. All these early beginners, the old timers, like at one time it seemed like when we started this thing, there were like only 3 people that made deer feeders. And within 10 years, there were 27 that made deer feeders. So what's that tell you?
Wow.
Something's working.
Something's working.
You know. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch on the shows. And of course, our events, we've had some of the craziest stuff. I hired a guy that my dad found before he passed away that had a pet brown bear that he went city to city, and not cities, but mostly towns, like smaller towns, like Castroville, small places. And he'd go sit up on a weekend in Pritchett, Colorado. My mother and dad had moved up there because they had a sister, and they were both retired, so they just wanted to get out of downtown Corpus Christi, you know. And they got up there, and he saw this guy. He sent me pictures and all this stuff. He says, he always called me Jerry Wayne. My dad always didn't call me Jerry. He called me Jerry Wayne.
Is Wayne
He
your real
didn't
name?
call me JJ, but he called me Jerry Wayne.
Jerry Wayne.
He said, Jerry Wayne, you need to see if you can hire this guy and bring him in down there at them shows. People come in there if they got a real bear. He says, and it's a wrestling bear. You can get in the cage with him.
Oh,
and we did all that.
you're kidding
I
me.
know, and some of these underling kids that didn't know no better, I let them do the first go round with them. You know? But I got pictures of my dad in the cage with him, and then later on, I'm talking about 10 years later on, the bear that you see in all the movies that they use, and this thing when he stands up, he's tapping on 9 feet. Big bear, but just tame. Just remind me to show you the pictures sometime. But that was just a go by and see. And the guy that brought the deal to the shows, well, he'd get in the cage and make him sit on his butt, and drank a beer and do different stuff, you know. But we always tried to bring in the latest deal that was really, well, the deal from the very get-go that has remained the most popular attraction, and I'm going to call that attraction, away from the booths and all this other stuff. This is the two-headed donkey deal. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Anyway, the one thing that has never died out, it's just gotten stronger and stronger. Started out with Joe Martin's South Texas Snake Handlers. And Joe's gotten bit about 12 times. So after he got bit at one of our shows in Louisiana. But he finally, his doctor said, look, you could go any time if you get bit again. He said, you got so much anti-venom in your system right now, I'm not sure. I mean, you got the world record of how many times somebody's been bit by a rattlesnake. One person. That was Joe Martin.
Yeah, so he's there every year.
I'm just saying, snakes goes back to biblical times.
Yeah.
Snakes have always been snake.
Right.
And so that as an attraction through the years continues to be, don't miss it before you leave the show.
Right.
Because they'll put them boogers right up there in front of your face. And you can ask questions. Well, what do I do if I get bit? You know, they tell you all that stuff.
Right. They put on a neat little show. I've definitely been around it and seen it.
We just always have tried to find something that would be of interest to hunters.
Yeah.
I mean, snakes. You got to be interested in snakes. A bear might eat you. So anyway, anything that was outdoor related at the show has always been a real success.
Now, you've had something else there that intrigued me when I was younger, because I remember seeing it. You had a deer there.
Do what now?
You had a deer, a live buck.
Right. We pulled that one off back in the days when Parks and Wildlife was a little more friendly about moving animals around. These days they're a little bit spooky about that. But Jerry Stafford, who's an outfitter and a world-class taxidermist, he's in southern Illinois, and he used to call his place Sampson's Mountain. And somebody bought out that, and he changed it to Sampson's Ridge. But he had this deer called Samson, semi-non-typical, kind of like that one over there. But this thing in those days, we're talking about the 80s, this thing scored like 350, 375, somewhere right in there.
Unheard
and
of.
in those days, anything over 300, you could almost count them on your hand.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, and he was dog gentle, just like that bear I described. And I just called him up and said, Jerry, because he'd been a follower of our deal. We went up there and filmed a television show once or twice. Maybe we did it twice. But he's always been one of those guys that wants one of them T-shirts that says, I ain't from Texas, but I got here just as quick as I could.
Yeah.
He's one of those kind of guys. He wished he was born in Texas. But I said, what could you do with Samson? Is that possible? If we can get a permit, is there some way you could trailer him down here? He said, well, I trailer there all the time because I sell them.
Yeah.
And he says, yeah, we can get him down there. I said, well, how can we do this? I mean, because I know he's been up and down the road at this the deal and that and so on and so forth, but what when he's in a room that might have 15,000 people in it? What's going to happen then? He said, oh no. I said, well, what if we do this? I said, what if we curtain in about a 20 by 20 spot, and the only way you can, it will regulate the number of people that go be in front of you.
Right.
And we can charge $1, try to pay for your gas money down here or something. And that's what we did. We just created a little curtain foyer that you went, it's kind of like sneaking in the restroom or something. You could go down there and take a ride. Nobody outside could look in.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah. And lo and behold, the second time we used him, guess who showed up and wanted to see that? I got pictures.
No idea.
Nolan Ryan.
I'll be dang.
Yeah. Nolan Rounds is a he's a big deer hunter.
Right.
Yeah. And he came to a lot of our shows. Nobody knew it but me and a couple other people, but George Strait come into the San Antonio show one time with a ball cap and big sunglasses on. He was walking around. And he got by with it. Nobody caught him. But there's been, Ray Scott's been there.
Yeah.
We had him as a speaker in Fort Worth one year. But we all got, the extravaganza is, and this one ought to be a real whopper because people didn't get to go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a long time with this, pandemic and all this stuff.
We've been cooped up with this COVID mess, so yeah, everybody's looking forward to it.
I'm predicting that people are going to turn out to this year's shows in San Antonio, Houston, and Fort Worth. I mean, I'm going to be real surprised if it ain't wall to wall.
I think it will be. I think it's going to be outstanding.
A few moments later.
All right, we took a little break, but we're back. And I wanted to ask you about something that you've told me this story a few times, and I love to hear it, and I try to get it out of you every time we get together. But we have quite a bit of an age difference. And there's some guys that have been really up in the spotlight since I was a young guy. And I've looked up to them as well as hunters, and I know a lot of other people do. But they may have not always been the guy in the spotlight. And the particular guy I'm speaking of now, he's been around you some, and you guys had a little, I don't want to call it a run-in, but a little incident here in San Antonio once at a trophy hunter show, and I think you know what I'm talking about.
I think that who you're talking about, his initials are probably JS.
I think you're right. Of course, we're talking about Jim Shockey. Of course, everyone knows who Jim Shockey is, and Jim's been an icon in the industry for quite a few years now. Mm-hmm. But he hasn't always been. And this story that I'm going to drag out of you takes place before he was Jim Shockey.
That's the truth. Reason I know that is back in that time period where you're going back to, every year we went to the SHOT Show. Mm-hmm. We went to the Safari Club International deal that sometimes they had it in Las Vegas and sometimes it was in Reno. But that was one of the shows you'd go to try to pick up some advertisement for the magazine or whatever, because you shake hands and visit everybody. Lo and behold, it was at Reno. I walked into the show, and by this time, Shockey had his TV show going. We started ours in 1999, so this might have been just a little bit before we came out with ours. But he was trying to start his show. Mm-hmm. At the time, nobody even knew who he was. Anyway, I saw him in the booth at the Safari Club International show, and I walked up to him and I looked at him, kind of grinned. And he looked at me and he kind of shook his head. And I said, "Man, you made the big time." I was really patting him on the back for how well he'd done, all that kind of stuff. And he says, "Well, I don't know if you remember this or not." I said, "Yeah, I remember this." Go ahead. He says, "I came, in those days," he said, "when your shows were over with, they closed and run everybody out at 10.
The extravaganzas.
Yep. And he said, I had been kind of following what you're doing. And he said, I came down there and I crashed one of your parties." I said, "I remember that." I said, "Are you talking about when we was down there at Mi Tierra, a restaurant that only one stayed open late? And the whole crew, which was about 20 people, we were taking a magic marker and writing on a tortilla, and we were flung them like frisbees across the room." And anyway, after I saw you there, and I was talking to Jim, after I saw you there, I started telling everybody, "This is Jim Shockey, got a television show," and so. But I said, he ain't from Texas. And he and I were going over this memory together, you know, right there in front of his booth. And I said, now the rest of your story, I don't know if you're going to tell it or not. I said, but do you remember getting wet that night? He started laughing. He said, yeah. Anyway, everybody was leaving the place, but you had to walk right down the side of the downtown river walk, which is San Antonio River. And you were walking beside one of our guys and probably had a little bit too much to drink. And he pushed you off in that thing. You remember that? He says, I do. He says, do you remember that? And I said, yes, I do. So, yeah, that was kind of an interesting deal, part of history of hunting.
Right. It's hilarious, you know, and it was, I assume it was all done in good fun. And
it was.
That's, yeah, I'll never forget that. And one day I'll meet Jim and I'll bring that up. Your phone's ringing.
Don't say that.
We'll take a short break.
A few moments later.
Well, we're back again. And that's a great story about Jim Shockey. I love hearing it. You've got tons of stories like that. I wish we had time to get more, but I think the world says that podcasts can only be about yay long.
Well, 40 years is kind of hard to cover
in an hour?
60 minutes.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. There's a few things, small things that I'd like to touch on before we wrap this up. But the future of trophy hunters and the trade shows or the extravaganzas, I don't see them dying out.
I don't either, because it's the one element we kind of got the corner on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you're the godfather of Texas hunting shows.
Right.
I mean, and there's no denying that. There's no getting around that.
No.
And people, I know, I look forward to it every year. I know a lot of people that look forward to those shows every year just to get out, see what's new, see what outfitters are out there, see what new hunts or maybe new rules and regulations. And then you guys have the guest speakers. Trophy hunters themselves will be set up there. They have a booth with new products, T-shirts, hats, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
There's so much neat stuff to do. And, of course, the rattlesnakes will be there.
Here's the one, all those attractions are just things that are part of that visit. That's just part of it. The rest of it is, I don't know if you think about things the same way I do, just logic. I mean, but how many times have you got something for Christmas and you looked at it and it's got 25 or 8 bolts and nuts and screws that you got to put together to get this contraption to work that you bought because you saw it after it was already and you needed it bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the thing about the extravaganzas is that what you can't find nowhere else, you can't get it out of a little book that came with the product or none of that stuff, but you get to meet the guy, in most cases, you get to meet the guy that invented whatever it is that you're interested in. And he tells you exactly, face to face, how to use that, how this can be the best benefit that you, if you're going to get this is what it'll do for you.
Right.
That kind of deal. That to me is a lot of why it's smart to go to the Hunter's Extravaganza if you're looking for a deer feeder, any of the paraphernalia that you need on a hunting lease or an outing on a paid hunt or whatever. You're gonna find the best of the best, and you're gonna be sitting or talking across the table from the guy that invented it. Right. So he can tell you any questions you got. Well, what if it this? What if it that? I mean, he's going to line you out, and that makes it so much more enjoyable when you buy something and it turns out to be just what you thought it was. You know,
it's true, sure. And I see the extravaganzas as a great networking place.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of people you can meet there in this industry. I say your industry. We're both in it, but it's unmatched, and they're all good people.
Yeah.
It's just such a great group of people to be around.
Right, right. To me, it's kind of reminiscent of some of the old movies you've seen on television about mountain men, Charlton Heston, somebody like that, you know. They had every year they'd come down out of the mountains, and it was one big weekend shindig of throwing tomahawks and shooting arrows and throwing knives and all kinds of stuff. It was just a big get together, kind of a Woodstock, a hunting kind of deal. And that's basically the same thing it is.
Yeah.
Everybody comes down, and the one, if you ask even if it's just a visitor, not somebody just on the booth, what's the biggest deal for you coming to the extravaganza? He says, most of them will say, there's never been a hunter's extravaganza that I've ever been to that I didn't run into 4, 5, maybe 6, 7 people that I hadn't seen in a year.
Right.
And it's just a gathering.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a like-minded bunch of people that got together, and they're all interested in the same thing, and it's kind of like Disneyland.
Yeah, I remember going to the shows when I was a kid. I don't know, 9, 10 years old or so, walking around with my dad. And I'm a little kid, you know, and all this stuff's interesting. I want to touch it. I want to see how it works and all this stuff. And it would bother me so bad because we couldn't make it 2 booths down, and my dad's running into a buddy. He's going to stand there in the aisle and talk to him forever. I'm like, Dad, come on. The funny part is, now that's me.
Yeah.
I'm walking down the aisles. I don't make it 2 booths. Hey, man, how you been? I ain't seen you in forever. You know, and then you meet their friend, and then their friend, or the guy in the booth you've never seen him in your life, but next thing you know, y'all are calling each other and talking about products and just shooting a breeze. It's such a neat.
I'll tell you about a funny thing that happened one time. One of those. It was at the Fort Worth show, but there was a guy there selling bear hunts, and he was kind of unusual. He's like the only one that you had black bear hunts up some state, and there were 2 or 3 guys standing in front of the table, wearing him out, asking questions, and back behind him was a big old heavy-set farmer-looking boy, coveralls. You know, just like something off of Hee-Haw. And he's standing right there with his hands in his pocket, and he ain't never said one word. And he's watching them guys wear this guy out about his bear hunt, and he's listening to the whole deal. Well, they finally said, well, we'll think about it, and walked off. The big fat boy with the coveralls walked up there. He reached in his pocket, and he pulled out a roll of $100 bills, about as big around as a tennis ball. And he says, I want to go on that hunt. I saw that happen.
Just like that.
Yeah, he just made his mind up, and it wasn't but just 2 words. I want to go on that hunt.
Well, heck, those guys up there wearing him out were getting all the information he needed.
Yeah. I want to go on that hunt.
Speaking of hunts, you offer hunts, right, on your ranch?
Well,
or you have a couple of ranches that you offer hunts on?
Yeah, we got a place in what they call the Golden Triangle down in Dimmitt County. Really nice place. We got a lot of big deer down there, and occasionally you could actually. I mean, it's happened, but there's mountain lions that come in and out of there. And of course, javelinas and bobcats. That's just normal stuff. You know, cactus with yellow blooms on them and all that.
A lot of quail too, huh?
And quail, doves. We got a big stock tank, and usually the first 2 weekends you get a really good hunt, and then they go somewhere else.
Right. But this, I grabbed this off your front porch just a minute ago. That's a monster.
That is a monster.
That's a big old deer. I mean, he's got a tine broke off here. It was probably that long.
Yeah. And look at all this business that's going on just
right. And here and here.
1, 2, 3 kickers on that one.
And then in that drop, probably 9 inches long. I mean, the mass is just unreal. I mean, goodness.
Yeah.
You found this basically in the front yard here.
Well, yeah, right here
within
on
reach.
Place. Yeah, that deer is in this pasture alive right now.
Man,
we're never going to kill him, but
sure. But to know you have deer of this quality just running around all willy nilly.
Well, I just want him to make me a whole bunch more of them.
I hear that. I hear that. And your hunting operation is Double J Ranch.
Double J Ranch.
Double J Ranch. Yeah. And you are on Facebook and Instagram and the whole 9 yards.
We're easy enough to find.
Right. And you've got a heck of a ranch manager, Brian Wilson, who's also a good friend of mine, good dude.
Yep.
Really good guy. Definitely knows his deer.
Yep.
And great. Yeah, if you're growing deer like that, I would say you're doing something right.
Well, we're trying to stay as typical as we can. It's hard, but we surely do produce mostly typicals.
Well, if
Now, he might
somebody
have some drop tines on
was
him.
gonna
Nobody gets mad about that or anything.
if somebody saw this deer and didn't want to harvest him, they need to quit deer hunting.
That's it.
I mean, that's the bottom
If
line.
that don't blow your skirt up, ain't
Nothing
gonna
will.
blow it up.
Nothing's going to do it. Nothing's going to do it. Well, Jerry, I wish we had more time. That's all I could say. I mean, I just wish we had more time. And maybe we'll come back.
Yeah, we do some more stuff.
Yeah, we'll always, well, I mean, we at the very least, we're going to talk on the phone and tell stories, right?
That's
Just
it.
not everybody's going to
That's
get to
it.
hear them.
And send pictures back and forth.
That's right. Well, guys, we can't thank you enough for joining in. We'd love to hear back from you. Do you have any questions for Jerry or for myself? We'd love to get back with you. Anything. Let's talk about the extravaganzas. You want to book a booth? It's going to boost your business, and you're going to have a great time. You're going to meet tons of people. It's a sure win for everybody. But for now, I think I'm going to pack up the equipment and head back to Houston. As much as I'd love to stay here in beautiful Castroville, Texas, I think Mama wants me to come home and help her with the kids.
I know right exactly where you're coming from. And it's a privilege for me to be on your show.
Well, the honor's mine.
Yep.
Truly, truly is. Well, guys, thank you. And I'm Jerison Harridge with the voice of Texas Hunting. Thanks for tuning in to the voice of Texas Hunting. I'm your host, Jerison Harridge. And remember, show your skull. We'll see you next time.